I never thought my marriage would end like this. 10 years together, 5 years married, 2 little boys who looked up to us. I thought we were solid. I thought we had built something real. Then, last night, I found the receipts. She had been staying at her sister's house once a week. That's what she told me, and I believed her. She worked late shifts, sometimes finishing at 9, with an 80-minute drive home. She said it made sense to crash at her sister's place instead of wasting gas and time driving back. It sounded reasonable. I trusted her. But something changed in December. She started pulling away. The playful kisses became rare. The intimacy that had once been effortless turned into something scheduled, almost obligatory. Then even that faded. I felt like I was the only one holding our marriage together. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me she felt trapped. That she wanted more freedom, more fun. She said I wasn't meeting her love languages. That I didn't make her feel special. She said all of that while she was sleeping with someone else. I didn't know it at the time. I was too busy blaming myself, trying to be better, trying to fix something that was already broken. Then, last night, I told her I would clean her car. She froze. Just for a second. Then she said, "No, don't worry about it." I laughed. "Come on, it's no big deal." She got up so fast that it caught me off guard. "Really, don't." Something in her voice put me on edge. I walked past her, grabbed her car keys, and stepped outside. I didn't even get to the car before she rushed after me, blocking my way. That's when I saw the papers in her hand. Receipts. She clutched them like they were something precious. Then, just as quickly, she turned and tried to throw them in the recycling bin. I moved faster. I grabbed them before they disappeared under a pile of junk mail. Condo parking. Paid at night. More than once. I looked at the dates. All lined up perfectly with the nights she was supposed to be at her sister's house. I turned to face her. "You cheated on me." She didn't say a word. She didn't deny it. She just stood there, watching me, waiting to see what I would do next. I stood there, gripping the receipts, my mind racing. The cold night air pressed against my skin, but I barely felt it. Everything around me faded, the porch light flickering above, the distant hum of traffic, the crickets in the yard. All I could focus on was her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She wasn't even trying to explain herself. She just stood there. That was what hit me the hardest. Not regret. Not guilt. Just nothing. My grip on the papers tightened. "How long?" My voice was calm, but it felt like a stranger was speaking through me. Her mouth opened slightly, but she hesitated. Like she was deciding whether to lie or tell the truth. "It doesn't matter," she finally said. I laughed. A bitter, humorless laugh. "It matters to me." She crossed her arms, looking away. A few months. I glanced at the dates again. Lying straight to my face, even now. "Try again." She exhaled, annoyed. "Since October." So, the whole time she had been staying at her sister's house. She had planned this. She had made a choice. Not once. Not twice. Dozens of times. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw her for what she truly was. Not my wife. Not the woman I had built a life with. Just a stranger who had been wearing a mask. I felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there, deep and raw, but beneath it, something else was growing. Resolve. I nodded slowly, slipping the receipts into my pocket. "All right." That made her nervous. "All right," she repeated, watching me closely. I turned and walked back toward the house. "Where are you going?" I ignored her. I stepped inside, went straight to my office, and locked the door. For the next hour, I sat in front of my computer, gathering everything I could. Bank statements. Shared accounts. Phone records. Her texts were deleted, but I could still see the timestamps, long gaps where she had clearly been talking to someone. Then I found her work schedule. Every single time she had stayed with her sister, it matched perfectly with her days off. She hadn't even been careful. Because she never thought I would check. I opened a new email and started writing. Subject: a divorce consultation request. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw things. I wasn't going to let her turn this around on me. I was going to be smart. Methodical. I would destroy her, but I would do it quietly. I would let her think, for just a little longer, that she was getting away with it. When I finally left my office, she was waiting for me in the living room, arms crossed. "So, what now?" she asked. Her voice was careful. She was trying to read me, trying to figure out where I stood. I shrugged. "We go to bed." She frowned. "That's it?" "For now." She didn't like that answer. She wanted a fight. An explosion. A reason to make me the bad guy. I wasn't going to give her one. I walked past her, up the stairs, and into our bedroom. She followed a minute later, sliding into bed without another word. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe beside me. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. The next morning, I woke up before she did. Not that I had gotten much sleep. My mind had been racing all night, playing through every scenario, every possible way this could go. I got out of bed quietly and went downstairs. I needed coffee, but more than that, I needed time to think. She had no idea what I was planning. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who begged for answers, who cried and pleaded, who let her walk all over him one last time. No, I was done with that. I had one goal now, to make sure she paid for what she did. And I was going to be smart about it. By the time she came downstairs, I was already sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone. I didn't look up when she walked in. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Are we going to talk about it?" I took a slow sip, then set the mug down. Finally, I met her gaze. "What's there to talk about?" Her expression flickered, just for a second, like she had expected something else. "You just found out about everything," she said carefully, watching me. "And now you're acting like it doesn't matter." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "Does it?" Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something, but then she stopped. She was confused. Good. She wanted me angry. She wanted me yelling. She wanted a fight because that would put her back in control. I wasn't going to give her that. Instead, I stood up, rinsed out my mug, and walked past her toward the door. "I have things to do today," I said over my shoulder. She didn't stop me. She didn't even ask where I was going. First stop, the bank. I had already looked over our accounts last night, but now it was time to make sure I was protected. I sat across from the banker, keeping my expression neutral. "I need to open a new personal account," I said. "And I need to move my direct deposits there." The banker nodded and pulled up the paperwork. "Are you closing the joint account?" "Not yet," I said. "Just adjusting some things." I wasn't going to be reckless. If I suddenly drained the account, she would know something was up. No, I was going to do this carefully. By the time I walked out of the bank, my money was safe, and my next paycheck wouldn't be hitting the same account she had access to. Step 1, complete. Step 2, the lawyer. I had emailed a few firms last night, and one had responded early this morning. They had an opening at noon. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat in the waiting area, running through everything in my head. I wasn't here to ask if I should leave her. I already knew what I had to do. I was here to find out how to do it in a way that left her with nothing. When my name was called, I followed the attorney into his office and sat down. He glanced at the papers I had brought, bank statements, phone logs, copies of the parking receipts. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. By the time I was done, he leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "You're in a good position," he said. "She's been lying, she's been absent, and it sounds like you've been the primary parent for a while now." I nodded. "I want full custody." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's aggressive." "She's been staying out overnight for months," I said. "She's been lying to me. I don't trust her judgment, and I don't want my kids growing up with a mother who puts herself first." The lawyer studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "We can work on that," he said. "But it's going to take some preparation. You'll need documentation, proof that you've been the one taking care of them the most. Can you get school records? Medical records? Texts where she admitted to being gone?" I pulled out my phone and started scrolling. "Yeah. I can get those." "Good," he said. "And one more thing, don't let her know you're doing this yet. If she thinks you're planning to take the kids, she might start acting like Mother of the Year overnight." I smirked. "She won't see it coming." Step 2, in progress. When I got home, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Where were you?" she asked. I shrugged. "Out." She didn't push. She still thought she had time. She had no idea that the countdown had already started. I spent the next few days preparing. Every conversation with her, every interaction, it was all calculated. I kept my tone neutral, my expressions unreadable. If she thought something was off, she didn't say anything. She was too comfortable. Too sure that she still had control. She had no idea that I had already spoken to the lawyer. That I had already secured my finances. That I was already gathering proof to take everything from her. But there was one more thing I needed. I needed to know who he was. I wasn't just going to let her walk away and pretend this never happened. I wanted the full picture. If she was going to destroy our marriage, then I was going to destroy whatever life she had built with him. So I started digging. I had already checked her phone records. No names, just numbers. But one stood out. A repeating pattern. Long calls on the nights she was at her sister's. Short calls throughout the day, just a couple of minutes each, like she was checking in with someone. Whoever this was, they were close. A co-worker? A friend? Someone I knew? I needed to find out. I copied the number and ran a search. Nothing public came up, but that was expected. I needed something more precise. So I called in a favor. I had a buddy from high school who worked in IT security. The kind of guy who could find just about anything if you asked the right way. I sent him a message. "Need a name attached to a number. Can you help?" His reply came 15 minutes later. "Of course. Give me an hour." I sat back, tapping my fingers against the table. An hour. Then I would know. And then? Then I would make sure he regretted ever touching my wife. An hour and 12 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I opened the message. And for a moment, I just stared at the name. It felt like my stomach had been ripped open. Brandon Ellis. I knew him. Of course I knew him. He was her co-worker. Worse than that, he was married. A little voice in my head whispered, "Good. That makes this easier." Because now I wasn't just taking her down. I was taking them both down. I needed evidence. Real, undeniable proof. The parking receipts were a start, but I wanted more. I wanted something that would leave no room for doubt. So I went to the condo. I already knew the address from the receipts. It was a high-end building, mostly rented by young professionals. Expensive, private, perfect for an affair. I sat in my car across the street, watching. Waiting. 2 hours passed. Then I saw her. She pulled into the parking lot, parked in the same spot she always had on the receipts. And then he walked out to meet her. Brandon. They didn't even look around. They didn't try to hide. They just walked inside together like they had done this 100 times before. And they probably had. I gripped my phone, snapped a few pictures, then sat back. That was all I needed. Now, I had everything. I sat in my car, gripping my phone, staring at the photos I had just taken. There it was, proof. My wife and her lover, walking into his condo like they had done it 100 times before. Like they had nothing to hide. Like I didn't exist. I could have stormed in right then and there. I could have confronted them, made a scene, demanded answers. But that would have been stupid. I wasn't here for answers. I already knew the truth. I was here to end them. And now, I had everything I needed. I drove home, my mind running through every possible move. I had options now. So many options. I could go straight to Brandon's wife. That would tear his life apart instantly. I could take the photos to HR at their workplace, make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of people they were. I could drop them on social media, let the world see them for what they were. But I wasn't going to be reckless. No, I was going to make sure the damage was permanent. I parked in our driveway and sat there for a moment. Inside, she was probably watching TV, acting like nothing had changed. She had no idea that I had just watched her betray me in real time. She had no idea that I was about to burn her world down. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and stepped inside. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up. "Hey," she said casually, like I hadn't caught her cheating less than 24 hours ago. I forced myself to stay calm. "Hey." She stretched her legs out, making herself comfortable. "You were out late." I smirked. "Yeah. Had some things to take care of." She nodded, not even slightly suspicious. She still thought she had me fooled. Good. Let her believe that. For now. That night, I barely slept. Again. I wasn't second-guessing my decision. I wasn't feeling guilty. I was planning. I had already spoken to the lawyer about custody. I had already secured my finances. Now, it was time to take them down. I woke up early, grabbed my laptop, and started working. First, I compiled everything I had, the parking receipts, the phone records, the texts, the photos. Then, I drafted 2 emails. The first was to Brandon's wife. Subject: "You deserve to know the truth." I attached the photos, the dates, the evidence. I kept the message simple. "Hi, I know this is painful, but you need to see this. My wife has been having an affair with your husband for months. I have proof attached. I thought you deserved to know the truth before they lie to you any longer." I read it twice, then saved it as a draft. I wasn't ready to send it yet. I wanted to make sure it would hit as hard as possible. The second email was for HR at their workplace. Subject: "A professional misconduct concern. To whom it may concern." I am reaching out regarding an inappropriate workplace relationship between two of your employees, a wife's full name, and Brandon's full name. I have obtained evidence that they have been engaging in an extramarital affair for several months. Given that they work together, I believe this could be a violation of your company policies. I have attached proof for your review. This one, I was going to hold on to for just the right moment. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make sure they lost everything. Later that morning, she finally asked, "So, are we okay?" I looked up from my coffee. "What do you mean?" She shifted in her seat. "I mean, we haven't really talked about everything. I just don't want things to be weird between us." She wanted closure. She wanted me to say something that would make her feel better. I wasn't going to give her that. I shrugged. "We'll figure it out." She smiled, like she actually believed that. Like she thought I was forgiving her. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up with only one thought: today is the day I start taking them down. No more waiting. No more playing nice. I had spent the last few days making sure all my moves were lined up perfectly. I had the receipts, the photos, the phone records, and the emails ready to go. Every step was calculated. Every decision was made with one goal in mind: to make sure she lost everything. I got out of bed quietly, leaving her still asleep. Downstairs, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My laptop was already open. The email to Brandon's wife was still sitting in my drafts. I hovered over the send button, my finger barely an inch away. Once I did this, there was no going back. I exhaled slowly. Then I clicked send. Step 1, done. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" At first, there was silence. Just shaky breathing. Then a voice, a woman's voice. "Who is this?" she demanded. I sipped my coffee, calm. "I think you already know." More silence. Then, "Tell me it's not true." I almost felt bad for her. Almost. "I sent you proof," I said simply. Her breathing hitched. "How long?" "Months," I said. "At least since October." A small, broken sound escaped her lips. She was crying now. I heard the rustling of papers, probably the photos I had sent her. I have to go," she said, her voice shaking. Then the line went dead. I set my phone down, staring at the screen. Step 2, done. Brandon's perfect little home life? Shattered. And I wasn't even close to being finished. That afternoon, I made my next move. I forwarded the email I had drafted for HR. Subject: a professional misconduct concern. I included everything: the receipts, the call logs, the photos. I even included a short paragraph about how their affair had negatively impacted their work environment. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. Once I hit send, I sat back and waited. Step 3, done. Now, it was only a matter of time. When I got home that evening, she was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of pasta filled the house, something she used to cook all the time when things were still good between us. She smiled at me when I walked in. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't been in another man's bed last night. I forced myself to smile back. "Smells good." She beamed. "I figured we could have a nice dinner, just the two of us." I nodded, playing along. "Sounds great." Let her believe this was just another normal night. She had no idea that by tomorrow, her world would come crashing down. The next morning, everything started falling apart. It began with a phone call. I was in the kitchen, drinking my coffee, when her phone started buzzing on the counter. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and immediately tensed. I watched as her face drained of color. She hesitated, then swiped to answer. "Hello?" Silence. Then, a muffled voice on the other end, angry, panicked, emotional. "Brandon's wife." I sipped my coffee slowly, pretending not to notice, but inside, I was enjoying every second of it. What are you talking about?" my wife stammered, trying to keep her voice down. More shouting from the other end. "I don't know where you heard that, but..." Pause. Then my wife's eyes flickered to me. That's when it hit her. She realized. She knew. Her hand clenched around the phone, her knuckles turning white. "No, that's not." Her voice faltered. She knew she was caught. Brandon's wife had the proof. The photos, the receipts, the timestamps. There was no way out of it. A few seconds later, my wife pulled the phone away from her ear. Stared at the screen. Call ended. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stood there, gripping the phone, eyes locked on nothing. I let the silence stretch, then took another sip of coffee. "Something wrong?" I asked casually. Her head snapped toward me, eyes wide, searching. She started, but she couldn't finish the sentence. I raised an eyebrow. "Me?" She swallowed hard. "Did you talk to someone?" I shrugged. "I talked to a lot of people." Her breathing was shallow now. Her mind was racing, trying to figure out just how much I knew. I gave her nothing. Just a small smirk. Then I set my mug down, stood up, and walked out of the kitchen. Let her sit with it. Let her stew. Let her feel exactly what I had felt for months. It didn't take long for Brandon's life to collapse next. By noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. I already knew who it was. I answered. "Hello?" A heavy exhale. Then, his voice. "You son of a bitch." I smiled. "Brandon. How's your morning going?" A sharp inhale. He was trying to control himself. "What the hell did you do?" he growled. I leaned back in my chair. "Oh, you know. Just made sure the right people knew the truth." "You ruined my goddamn life," he snapped. "My wife kicked me out. My job is..." He stopped himself. So HR had already called him in. Good. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Brandon took another breath, his voice shaking now. "You don't understand, man. You..." I cut him off. "No, Brandon. You don't understand." More silence. I continued, my voice calm. Controlled. "You thought you could sleep with my wife, lie to your own, and just get away with it?" I chuckled. "That's not how this works." His breathing was ragged now. I could feel his panic through the phone. "You think this is funny?" he spat. "Actually?" I said, smiling. Yeah, I do." And then I hung up. That evening, she finally broke. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when she stormed into the room. "Why?" she demanded. I barely looked up. "Why what?" Her hands balled into fists. "Don't play dumb. You told her, didn't you? You sent her those pictures." I leaned back. "Brandon's wife?" I asked. "Yeah, I did." Her jaw clenched. "You had no right." I laughed. "No right?" I echoed. "You actually standing here, Telling me I had no right to tell the truth? She faltered. I stood up slowly, stepping closer. No, see, you had no right, I said, voice low. You had no right to do this to me. To our family. To our kids. Her face twisted. It wasn't. Don't, I cut her off. Don't you dare try to justify it. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. You don't understand. I laughed again. Oh, I understand perfectly. She stared at me, her whole body trembling. She was terrified. Because she knew this wasn't over. Not even close. She didn't sleep that night. I knew because I stayed awake just to watch her fall apart. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, breathing shallow and uneven. Every few minutes, she'd shift, run a hand through her hair, or glance at me like she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She knew it wouldn't change anything. She had lost control, and she felt it. By morning, she looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Face pale. Hair a mess. She sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, staring at the floor like a woman who had just realized she'd bet everything, and lost. I got up, stretched, and acted like I didn't notice. Long night? I asked casually. She flinched slightly but didn't answer. I smirked to myself and headed for the shower. Let her sit in it. When I came downstairs, she was at the kitchen table, phone in hand. I didn't have to guess who she was texting. Brandon. She was probably trying to figure out how bad it was. Was his wife divorcing him? Was his job still safe? Did HR already send an email? I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. She didn't look up. I took a slow sip. Then I said, he's not going to save you. Her whole body tensed. Finally, she lifted her head. What? I leaned back in my chair, watching her. Brandon. He's not going to save you. Her eyes darted back to her phone, like she expected a message. Nothing. I chuckled. Let me guess. He's been distant today, hasn't he? Her fingers clenched around the phone. That's none of your business. Oh, but it is, I said. Because I know exactly what's happening right now. She stared at me, waiting. So I spelled it out for her. He's panicking. His wife found out. He's trying to keep his job. And the last thing he's worried about? I smirked. You. Her jaw tightened. I shrugged. He's going to ghost you, you know. If he hasn't already. She didn't respond. Because she knew I was right. I took another sip of coffee, enjoying the way her expression crumbled. Brandon's fighting for his life right now, I said. You were just a side piece. And now? I chuckled. You're nothing but a liability. She inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around her phone. But she still said nothing. Because she knew. She had thrown everything away for a man who wasn't even willing to fight for her. And now? She was alone. An hour later, my phone buzzed. An email. From HR. I opened it, my heart already racing. Subject, a follow-up regarding workplace conduct report. I skimmed through the message, my eyes landing on the key sentence. We take all reports seriously and have conducted a formal review. As of today, Brandon Ellis is no longer employed with our company. I grinned. Brandon was fired. I kept reading. Regarding wife's name, appropriate disciplinary action has been taken, and she is currently under review. They didn't fire her. Not yet. But I wasn't finished. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. It was time to take the final step. That evening, I walked into the house and found her sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. She looked defeated. I sat across from her, exhaled, then said, "I spoke to my lawyer today." She blinked, then finally looked at me. "What?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I'm filing for divorce." She sucked in a breath. She swallowed. "You don't want to talk about this first?" I laughed. "Talk about what?" I asked. "How you lied to me? How you let me believe I was the problem while you were screwing another man?" She flinched. I shook my head. "No. We're done." Tears welled in her eyes. I'm taking the kids," I continued. "You've been gone most nights. I have proof. I've been the one taking care of them." Her lips parted. "You can't?" "I can," I interrupted. "And I will." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. But I didn't care. She had made her choices. And now, she was paying the price. She sat there, staring at me, her face pale, her eyes wet with unshed tears. I could see it, the realization sinking in. She had spent the last few days pretending this was something we could fix, that I would eventually calm down and that she could talk her way out of it. But now, she knew. This was real. I was done. She started, but her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, took a shaky breath, and tried again. "I know I messed up," she whispered. "But..." I cut her off. "No." Her lips parted slightly, her breath hitching. "No," she echoed. "No." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "You don't get to but your way out of this. You don't get to sit here and act like this was just some mistake." She flinched. "This wasn't a mistake," I continued. "You made a choice. Over and over again. You lied to me. You gaslit me into thinking I was the problem. You let me believe that if I just tried harder, if I just loved you more, you'd come back to me." Her chin quivered. I shook my head. "But you were never planning to come back, were you?" She closed her eyes, pressing her lips together. I chuckled, shaking my head again. "Damn," I muttered. "I really loved you, you know that?" Her eyes snapped open. For a split second, I saw something there, guilt, pain, maybe even regret. But it was too late. She had already thrown it all away. After a long silence, she exhaled shakily. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back. Now we divorce." She winced, like she was just now hearing the word for the first time. "But the kids?" "I'm taking them." Her head snapped up. "No, you not." I tilted my head. "You wanna fight me on this?" She hesitated. She knew she had no case. She had barely been home for months. I had evidence of that. Her long shifts, her nights at her sister's, the weekends she suddenly needed alone time, it was all documented. Meanwhile, I was the one who had been there. I was the one who got them ready for school, who made their lunches, who tucked them in at night. She knew the courts would see that. She knew she couldn't win. Still, she tried to argue. "They need their mother," she whispered. I nodded. "Yeah, they do." Then I met her eyes, my expression hard. "So why weren't you there for them?" She had no answer. Because there was no excuse. Later that night, I started packing. I didn't even wait for her to leave. She just stood in the doorway, watching as I pulled a suitcase from the closet and started filling it with my clothes. "Where are you going?" she finally asked. I didn't look at her. Getting a hotel for now. Her voice shook. You don't have to leave. I zipped the suitcase shut. Yeah. I do. She was crying again. Good. Let her cry. Let her feel even a fraction of the pain she put me through. I grabbed my bag, walked past her, and left. I didn't look back. The next morning, I had my lawyer draft up the divorce papers. It didn't take long. I had already gathered everything I needed, the proof, the financials, the custody request. The lawyer was confident. This would be quick. By noon, the papers were ready. I drove back to the house. She was sitting on the couch when I walked in, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. When she saw me, her eyes flickered with hope. Maybe she thought I had changed my mind. I didn't. I set the papers on the coffee table. What's this? She asked. I stared at her. You know what it is. Her hands trembled as she picked up the stack of papers. She flipped through them, her breath catching when she reached the custody section. You really doing this? She whispered. Yes. She swallowed hard. You won't even try? I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter. I tried, I said. I tried when I begged you to talk to me. I tried when I stayed up at night wondering what I did wrong. I tried when I believed your lies. I gestured to the papers. This? This is me stopping. Her lips trembled. She flipped to the last page, staring at the line where she was supposed to sign. I crossed my arms. Sign it. Her tears fell silently as she picked up the pen. And then, with a shaky hand, she signed. It was over. The papers were signed. It was over. She sat there, staring at them, her hand still gripping the pen like she could somehow take it all back if she just held on long enough. But she couldn't. The damage was done. I reached forward, grabbed the papers, and neatly stacked them. I wasn't rushing. I wanted her to feel every second of this. She sniffled, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. So that's it? I looked at her. That's it. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You really don't love me anymore? I studied her for a moment. Did I? The truth was, I wasn't sure. I had loved her for 10 years. Built a life with her. Had kids with her. She had been my everything. But after what she did? After the lies, the betrayal, the way she made me feel like I was the one failing while she was sleeping with another man? Whatever love I had left, it wasn't enough to save this. So I told her the truth. I don't know, I said. And honestly? It doesn't matter anymore. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw true regret. Not because she got caught. Not because she was losing everything. But because she had destroyed something that could never be fixed. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked to the door. She didn't stop me. She didn't even move. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I stayed in a hotel for the next few weeks. It wasn't great, but it was better than being in that house. My lawyer was already working on custody, and given everything I had documented, he was confident. She won't get full custody, he told me. She's barely been home. You've been the primary caregiver. The judge will see that. Still, I knew the fight wasn't over. She wasn't going to let me walk away that easily. And I was right. One night, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But then I saw the caller ID. Her dad. I sighed, debating for a second before picking up. Hey. He exhaled heavily. Son, we need to talk. I tensed. I knew what this was. I'm not changing my mind, I said. I'm not asking you to, he replied. I just want to understand what happened. I closed my eyes. Didn't she tell you? She told me her side, he admitted. But I want to hear yours. I hesitated. Then, for the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out. The affair. The lies. The manipulation. Everything. By the time I finished, he was silent. Then, finally, he spoke. I had no idea, he murmured. I sighed. Yeah. Neither did I. Not for a long time. There was another pause. Then he said, I want you to know, no matter what happens between you two, you'll always have my respect. And my support. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This was the only real father figure I had ever had. And he was still in my corner. Thanks, I muttered. And for the first time in weeks, I actually felt a little less alone. The divorce process dragged on, but I never wavered. I stayed firm on custody. I stayed firm on what I deserved. She fought it at first. She tried to say I was being unfair. That I was taking everything from her. I just laughed. I wasn't taking anything. She had thrown it all away herself. Months passed. I moved into a new place, my place. I got primary custody of the kids. She got visitation. Brandon? From what I heard, his wife divorced him, took half of everything, and moved to another state. And him? Last I checked, he was struggling to find work after getting fired. Good. They both got what they deserved. One night, as I was tucking my youngest son into bed, he looked up at me and whispered, "Are we gonna be okay, Daddy?" I smiled, brushing his hair back. "We're gonna be better than okay, buddy." Because for the first time in a long, long time, I actually believed it.